Hi, my name is Alfonso Albaisa, and this is Cars and Culture, and I'm here with Jason Stein.
We're sitting 4 blocks from where you grew up. We're in the Coconut Grove area of Miami, which has changed significantly in the last 30 or 40 years, Alfonso. What does it mean for you to be back here in this neighborhood, in the role that you have now? And by the way, having come in from your usual spot, which is Tokyo.
Yeah. Always, as artists or designers or creators or maybe any human being, when you come home and you get rushed by all the things that are so detached from like what you're doing today. It's a bit shocking always. And then when you're talking about who you are today in the context of seeing the little guy and then the person who's designing cars, especially since the reason I'm designing cars was because of what I had seen when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
Here on the streets of Coconut Grove, a Jaguar E-Type. So there is very little separation for me from Miami to what I love so deeply doing, which is design. And yeah, walking the streets. Coconut Grove has changed a lot.
Yeah.
But in many ways, because the jungle dominates and the kind of unusual character of the Grove, it also doesn't change. So yeah, it's great to be back.
That Jaguar, you were exposed to vehicles through the vibrant nature of this neighborhood during that time, but that Jaguar is emboldened, is a symbol in your mind of where you wanted to go and what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that memory of it becomes quite clear when you come back to a place like Coconut Grove.
Especially because the light, because my dad was an architect and he had a studio in the Grove, and it was a coral rock building. It's quite an old original Grove building, and the lobby was glass, and he had a huge City of Miami model in there, and my love was boats actually, and I would spend all my time drawing a boat and then making it out of balsa wood, which was the wood of his models. And then he would get mad at me because I'd make a little trailer and I'd put it behind the little cars, and I'm Alfie, please, this is it's a professional model. And one day I heard this sound. So I'm in the lobby playing with the models, and I hear a grumbling, gurgling sound, and I'll never forget the gravel, because it was a gravel driveway. So it drew my attention, and I looked out, and the sun that you've been here it has to somehow get around the clouds, which are very thick, and then get through the leaves, which are very thick, and the branches, and finally get to the road. And what all of that did to that black E-Type convertible body was a change. I put the balsa wood away, and I just started drawing cars, and I'll remember it so detailed even today at 57 years old. So it's been a while.
And your father, as an architect, obviously surrounded himself with design and was a designer to some extent himself. Yeah. The black felt pen onto graph paper, right? But your automotive design and where you wanted to go with your life was also influenced by your uncle, correct?
Yes, my uncles and the whole family are architects, and the unusual twist in my particular family is that my mom's uncle was a super famous architect in Cuba, and he's a bit of an icon in the family, and like the Tropicana Club was designed by him, and all of these things. So you had this weird sense like, yes, you should do this kind of thing, but at the same time, the achievements of those before you were a bit too high for you to imagine yourself doing it, even though drawing felt natural, doing this felt natural. Not the felt tip, that's not natural. I don't know how my dad did that. but it was an interesting kind of mix about knowing what you wanted to do, but being a bit humbled by that.
Japanese cars were trickling into the United States at that time, and your uncle had a Honda 600, correct?
Yes.
And I think that there was a Z that may have come into the picture at a certain point.
Yes.
Which brings us, of course, full circle to why we sit here today. Tell me about that.
My uncle, another uncle, he studied at Pratt Institute, which was where I ended up.
Which is where you ended up,
yeah.
right?
And when he came back, he had a Honda 600, a little orange thing, and I remember this. It was, as you say, the Japanese products and cars were now changing life Americana. Like my dad, I remember he brought this little box home one day, and because our TV wasn't working so great, and he pulled out this little orange TV. And I'm like, what is that? I mean, it looked cool, but I couldn't believe that can really replace the Zenith or whatever that was.
Yeah, it wasn't an RCA, right?
Wow, the picture was so clear and the reception so great. It's the same story in the cars, that somehow in the early 70s, they hit that perfect spot where the gas crisis and everything, but there wasn't a lot of really cool cars. But the 240 was, when I first saw that, I was like, wow, that's a sexy car. And a couple of the office boys in my dad's studio, they had one. And you saw these young architects feeling all, cool in their 240s, which is, they were actually cool.
Long hood, short deck,
Oh, yeah.
classic sports car proportions, great for the streets of Tokyo or maybe Rome, but Little Havana, would be like an awakening, correct?
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
these were little tiny cars in the U.S. context. I mean, people had Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme and Monte Carlos, which were considered small cars.
Yeah, right.
And and the 240 next to that, they look vulnerable, but very, very cool. And they quickly, Nissan became, or it was Datsun actually,
Right.
Was embraced very quickly by the Latins, and many, many people you started seeing very quickly Japanese cars here in the Land Cruisers. I remember my buddy's older brother had a Land Cruiser with the folding windows. It was just a cool time to see that transformation.
You're unique in the sense that you've only worked at one car company.
Yep.
And yet designers tend to move from one station to another over the course of their career. Yep. But if we go back to your first boss and we connect it again to the Z, he had a Z, right? Yep. And he would let you drive it occasionally.
Yes. Yeah. Tom was a fanatic about sports cars, so he always had a Z. And I moved to California to the studio in '88, and like every student, just student loans up to here, and it's shocked by the price of the rents of same as everyone. And so I had a little Renault car that would only start on Mondays. And when my boss would go away on a trip, for business trip, he would give me his twin turbo Z.
Must have been like stepping into a Ferrari.
I was kind of, and I remember especially it wasn't the 300Z, it was the one before, and the shifting, the dropping, and just the power, and it had all the your door is ajar era of Japanese cars, or with the voice conversations, and it was a UFO, and Nissan has been a few companies. So yes, I've been here my whole life, more than half of my life. But there's been many waves of differences, and even in the Alliance time, top management, when they change, Nissan changes. So the company felt different many, many times. So I don't feel, and because we design everything, I've designed yachts for Nissan and golf clubs for TaylorMade with Nissan. So it doesn't feel like 35 years, to be honest. It changes.
Where is it now?
Now, we're new again, to be honest, and especially the portfolio. If like now or like this portfolio, I am so stunned by because of how it went down. So we call it Nissan X and all of this stuff, and then of course coined A to Z. But it was a reaction. It was when there was change of bosses, and the practice of the company had been a bit to you know very well, to trigger a new car is billions, and that's if you don't touch the factory. If you have to touch the factory, you're doubling it up. And they would play with that a little bit because of the financials. And so unintentionally, they created the oldest portfolio in the planet that was draining the company dry. And so I come in, because Shiro had retired, and a new CEO came in with me, and he gave me a piece of paper, literally, and said, these are the cars you have to do, and you have to do them now. And it created probably a once in a lifetime, where you can do an entire portfolio, not 2 cars, 3 cars, like most head designers have to do in the beginning. It was over 20 cars. It was so monumental that you had to change quickly how you think of the company and the new technologies. And so we were blessed we knew there was the new platforms coming, but it's not all EVs. Well, we had to do Frontier, which is not an EV, as we know. Right. And so Frontier, Aria, Rogue, Pathfinder, QX60, all done at the same time. And we really became students. We were studying Japanese history because I really felt Nissan had lost its identity through the journey. And that if you ask people on the street, who are the Japanese car companies, they would quickly tell you Toyota and Honda and maybe Mazda and Subaru. And then if you then say, why didn't you mention Nissan? They say, oh, kind of Japanese.
Too American?
Yeah, they felt this kind of was not probably, I'm not going to say it was too meaning negative.
Right. But
Because
just Americanized.
it's just an international company,
right.
which is on one side great. But if you ask them what a Japanese car was, it's cool, it's chic, it's colorful, it's edgy. We're all positive things. So I felt that we were losing on the halo of being Japanese unintentionally. If it was intentional, okay, that's fine. But I don't think the company intended that. So designing these 20 cars, we went deep into what it means to be Japanese. And
what did you draw from to
history,
to form that? But which elements of history?
The art history and architecture history. So the Z, for instance, it's a quite minimal car. There are very few details. It's not minimalism. We found a beautiful word, ma, which is the mastery of the empty space in architecture. The gardens come from this, the rock gardens. And we fell in love with this sense of harmony that the Japanese architects would consider carefully elements they add because they have great meaning when you're only going to add a few. And where Western minimalism was subtractive, probably reaction to Art Deco or Art Nouveau in Europe, where they were tired of the excess. Japanese don't have that in their history. And maybe it's BS and maybe not important because we're designing a car anyway. But we felt that these nuances were part inspirational for us to find a different minimalism, which we like. And also kabuki is another great one, which we all know kabuki theater where they paint their faces white. But in shogun history, war history, 600, 700 years ago, this expression was to behave extraordinary, like a little bit crazy, a little bit nutty. And in Japan, this embracing of the unusual also was the defining thing. So the Rogue's face with the high character split lamp and these elements were very much trying to create this unusual character, which is friendly and pleasing. It doesn't make you feel strange. So we've been mixing these. We went deep into this stuff, and I loved it. And it helped so much making Pathfinder and Rogue and Z and Aria, all these things.
What an enormous journey to be on, and an opportunity as a design, as the head of design and your design team, to say that you'll have a stamp on 20 vehicles.
Yeah.
Very rarely in history does an individual and his team have the chance to recreate and to form the basis for the future. You had to take that as an overwhelming opportunity.
Yes, overwhelming was the first one, and then opportunity was when I got up off the ground, where you look at it so optimistically. But I was worried because just the capacity of the team.
Right.
Was coming at a time when digital shift is happening, and it helped us a great deal. Because even the physical sense of making models for all of these and how to get the overseas studios involved and not overwhelmed, because the creation of a car is an act, of course, of process, but it's also an artistic thing, and the people can get confused, especially because we didn't feel that we're going to follow the mantra of there's a design philosophy and you apply it to things. So we didn't want headlamp signatures, no body signatures. I don't want that. That's a little bit too easy.
Everything could stand on its own.
Everything stands on its own because our customer is like that. You have Jukes in Europe. You have GTR. I mean, let's do the heavy hitting things right away. GTR and Z, they should never look alike. And it's because the customer is demanding something very different. And then you get in a Rogue is not a Qashqai, a European. We used to have Rogue Sport, so that's European Qashqai. We had real human beings saying, I consciously don't want that car. I want this car. And I love this car. So we felt that there was a bit of an opportunity to challenge this thing, this assumption that you needed, that brand was a physical expression. So my feeling is brand is an emotional expression of trust, that I like this company. This company makes this type of car. But that's nothing to do with a body side or a headlamp. It has to do with the whole thing. So I'm very happy that they all worked.
Yeah, where are you in the journey now?
The A to Z cars are all hitting heavy, good, thank God. Now COVID, it makes it difficult to know what is happening. But we go by the customer, and then the transaction price is a good trigger of like the grades they're selecting. So every car is expensive right now. But you can judge your performance with where people within the car, like if they tend to be going to the high spec cars is because they really love the car. They're not doing it because they can afford it. They're doing it because they love it. And this, our customer has changed to people who love us and love us again, really, because they have loved us before. Back to the unintended results, we somehow put business in front of why people buy cars. Is you have to have a relationship with them. And this relationship is not numbers necessarily. They need to afford cars, and the lease price or the purchase price, very important. But if it's just that, then the race in the car is to make a cheaper car full of features. But that's not what we should be about. We have to make cars that people love, and they want to make their memories in the car they bought today.
You asked the question of the Japanese consumer of where Nissan was in the conversation, and they gave you a very detailed answer. Do you feel that this transformation has allowed Nissan to return to the forefront of the Japanese consumer's mind?
We're really now, thank God, because that was one of my biggest headaches, because I didn't know how it was going to work in Japan.
Very different than where it works here.
I'm American, so I know the fondness that people have for Nissan and Japanese cars. And I was head of design in Nissan in Europe for 3 years. I made Qashqai and Juke and these things. I know how they feel, and they have a warmth in their heart. Now, Japan is different because that's where it was born. And Nissan in Japan is almost 90 years old. It's a part of society. And I was really hoping that all of this stuff, including the Japanese DNA, was not feeling unusual for them, because they're very detailed in their reaction to things. And I recognize I'm a foreigner. And my sensitivities are going to not be the same And but they've been very good. So we just launched a little tiny first ever EV K car, and we'll never be able to make all the cars that they are asking. It was never in the plan to make that number. And we're great in the Zs, where we thought that in the Life we would have a kind of number. Well, we've sold the life of the car, and we're barely sending them yet to people's homes. So it's a good feeling because, again, I think that our portfolio Z is a future car, of course, but it's also about the memories of people and the things they saw as a child, and we really wanted the Z to feel like it touched on many memories that they had with their family or friends and all of them.
Is there a specific design language that you want the Z to communicate or to impart to people who see it?
The memory. I wanted it to be not necessarily retro. We had a very deep discussion because I've been involved in 3 Zs, and especially
including the first one you saw as a clay model when you walked into the studio.
Yeah, the 300 was,
right.
And that I wasn't involved as much as I was floored.
Blown away, right.
And like I wanted to go home. Like it was one of those reactions where you, as a designer, you feel what you're doing is cool. And I had won the replacement of the Triangle Pathfinder, the first one. I had won the second one. And it was killed by regulation, unfortunately. But I went to Japan for the decision meeting. So, when you're thinking, because in the pre-meetings, my design was selected. So you're feeling somewhat like, okay, you're doing something that people are resonating. And so you naturally feel a little confident because you're also 23, 24 years old. I opened the door to that, and I wanted to go home because I felt like I was just rubbish. And it's like one of those things that immediately changed my taste. It was, as a clay model, it had no features. It was just a pure, sleek, beautiful form that I couldn't even understand that. I saw the tape outline of the headlamps. At that time, you didn't have headlamps angled like that. It was like part technical breakthrough that we weren't used to, and also just the minimalism and this sense. It moved me. That's why the Z has that. Some parts are super minimal because I'm in love with that. But the other parts is that talking to people, everyone keep talking about 240. When we did the Revival Z, so the 2000 Z designed by Ajay Panchal, we had a retro car there too, at the Go With One. It was no votes. The company and society was still looking forward 100%. And something happened here that the same circumstances, we had a very forward-looking, modern, challenge everything proposal, and we had the one that was selected. It was why are we here? What is this car? Oh, no. We always thought we were making this one. It was that kind of thing. It was the quickest DDM, and executives were like, what do you need? It was unlike other kind of meetings. And I really want people to somehow feel eras of Z, but still feel like they, of course, have a brand new Z.
What element of the vehicle, 2 questions. What element are you most proud of, and what element was the most difficult to achieve?
It might be the same, but there's many elements so I can add some. But the silhouette was, in the modern era, a car with the rear lower than the front volume, it doesn't really exist so much.
Yeah.
And but we knew this was from the beginning. Like when we start a project, we have this proportion phase where the designers get to have very close relationship with the package engineers. And we wanted the hood longer, so the car got longer. And it's interesting how quickly people appreciated some of these big requests. That doesn't mean it's possible.
Right.
and the possible parts relating to crash performance, relating to weight. It's a sports car. From the beginning, we knew twin turbo, 400 horsepower, and with a manual was like, it wasn't a foregone conclusion, but it was on the table of things that were likely, if we can figure out how to get a manual to handle all that kind of force. And so the rear was the part that was a bit tricky, because the rear wants to be a little bit higher, but it didn't need to be at the end. You know, this is the thing. You know, designers get a little bit of a bad rap for challenging everything. But the Z car...
Well, you create these beautiful vehicles that can't be put into production, right?
Yes. And the Z was a bit of an eye-opener in the sense that some of the things that seem not possible or not likely actually can. You just have to adjust other areas to compensate for certain things. So I do love the silhouette because it was not easy. It was really, things would inch up and then it comes back down. But the headlamps were really tough because we didn't want the car to be cute. Mm. And of course, around type of light was studied significantly. And we had super modern ones that had nothing round, and the car was nice. But some people, the mood of the company was, this has to be a 240. Like, finally, let's make what we have been teasing and tickling, and because the Ajay's Revival Z was never wanted to have anything to do, because the 300ZX had become unpopular. It's hard to imagine today, but it was a car that wasn't selling very well. It was expensive. And
when it was launched, it was breathtaking.
Yes, it was. So Jay and those of us, but Randy Rodriguez, the following, the 370, was supposed to be a 240, but not. It didn't really. You're mixing modernity, and so we were very afraid of that. We really want to make a 240. So luckily the Genos, we're so close to our Zama factory, our heritage museum. So one of the great things is just make a phone call. Can we bring it over? Any car, including racing cars. And we have those in our studio. So we brought the Genos, and the way the light was hitting the glass cover, it was the cue because it intersected the round light. And it gave us license to artistically interpret the Genos with the Z. So that was, to be honest, a midnight. The last midnight came through the rear end was easy, other than its height, but we knew we wanted it to be like the 300.
Do you feel the responsibility when you start a project like the Z, given all of your history, right back here to the streets of Miami, given the history of seeing that first clay model, given the fact that everybody's been waiting so long for the next iteration, we mentioned the opportunity versus the...
I'm a stress kitten. I really feel it on every project. But the Z, I was quite, it felt so different than... So I was with Ajay working on the 350, and actually the interior is my design. I didn't have that. Maybe because I was much younger, but I felt a great responsibility because the company was on its knees. So when we're designing it, we're not heavyweight, we're close to, what is the right below heavyweight? We are a big company that was on its back. And we were not up yet. To get money for a Z car was not the priority in a company that's making almost 20 cars. You can easily collapse the company by making too many cars where you have to, before you're making money, you're dropping major money for the factories, all the tooling. So I was impressed. I kept thinking this car is going to stop. Because all the other cars in the studio actually make financial sense. And they're needed. You need a new road. 600,000 units of globally. And no one's going to question that. And the Pathfinder, even though just American, yeah, D-segment SUV,
Hugely
of
important.
course. And it was so cool in the studio. Everyone, oh my God, okay, can you make it sooner? That's really down the hallway. You can talk to some people about the sooner stuff. And so I was very worried. So not only worried about failing with the design, worried that I was now in love. And heartbreak is painful. And disappointing people and all of this stuff. And to be a car designer, you have to be part child. Because you need this emotional thing to allow you to want to change everything all the time, to get frustrated quickly. I'm sure it's a bit of a burden for the company, especially HR. But yeah, I'm a bit of a stress kitten about, because there's people who love cars and they are really eager to have the next thing.
And the community around this particular vehicle is probably as fervent as anything else that exists in the world.
Peter Brock, he was interesting because I went to visit some people like him before we started. And he was reluctant to say anything, because I wanted to know, what would you like? This is an opportunity, we haven't started. And he was very oh, no, it's going to be great. And they've all been great, so it's going to be great. Just enjoy. He was very encouraging. And then his wife kind of smacked him. He goes, no, he wants you to change those door handles.
Bring him in.
So I knew that if I messed that up, I'm going to be
in a lot of trouble.
There's going to be a lot to answer for.
Enzo Ferrari famously said in 1961 when he saw the Jaguar XKE at the Geneva Motor Show that it was the most beautiful car that he'd ever seen. What automotive design captures your imagination?
Obviously the Jag, because it was why I got in it. And the Italians of the 60s, I have a softness. My mom used to watch The Graduate over and over again.
The Alfa Romeo.
And the Alfa, I just loved the Duetto. So much I wanted my first, when I was 25, I needed to have, my fantasy was I would buy an Alfa Spider. And I had an Isuzu Impulse at the time that had difficulties starting. And I remember at lunch it didn't start and I had to push it. It was a bit humiliating. And then I drove back to the studio and there was a Alfa Romeo at a Corns Motors dealer with a little discount. It was like $19,000 or something like that. This is 1991. And I'm still student loans and apartments, the bills, but I'm like, okay, I have to drive in. I have to check. And it was a good monthly price, wasn't so bad. And I drove off, and it struck me that I'm not 25. And that fantasy, and I really loved that whole experience. But so the Alphas, but I must say that the car that is most humbling in the sense of when you see a design that came from a place you don't understand, like as an artist or designer, like what was that idea? I had just become director for North America. Part of that job was participating in the selection of global cars, even the ones we don't work on. And back then, this is 2000, was you get things in FedEx, and there are photos. And there was an interesting car. It's a kind of big wheels, kind of coupe-ish, but this is an SUV. And the first one very angular, kind of cool. Okay, kind of cool. I look at the next one, a bit angular, also kind of cool. The third one was an egg that swallowed an aircraft carrier. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And it like moved you, right? It's a bit like the 300 that happened to you. You see something artistic that you don't know how they came up with that. It was the FX. Yeah. So even though I think your question is a broader one, I love 911s. They're refining that stone always so impeccably. But the shock value of that FX, probably because I saw the scale, photograph of the scale, it was traumatic. And I'm always chasing that sense of the wow, like where did that come from? That's the toughest thing to do that, where it almost, that if we think about that time, there was only the BMW X5. So it was a major leap of design to combine coupe-ish personal car with this is the biggest, first 22-inch or something like that, kind of the biggest wheels in the world. That was cool.
I'll ask you some continual general questions. I've asked Frank Stevenson on this program. I've asked Clay Dean. I've asked Ralph Gilles. What are the indicators that you look at? What are the long-range design trends that help you design?
Probably my colleagues have similar answers. You know, you just get inspired by, someone always throws a stone and it ripples. And it's impressive when, you know, if you look through the history of car design, someone made the first move. And then that has, so you're always looking for like, oh, this is interesting. I wonder what they were thinking. And, oh, that's an interesting, you know, when you went from the jelly beans back to the architectural structure things, the Audi TT was a big, like, shock. At the time was the Beetle. Those things, like on the one side, you can be fully retro and cool and charming as a car, which cars were not necessarily charming. And then the TT, this industrial chic little thing, but it's still little. There's moments where you felt designers created a mood, and that went through the... So you're always looking at that. And then in yourself, you're looking at technology, like what's happening in architecture or in consumer goods and your furniture design. And you get inspired by attitudes that are changing in our other fashion designers. So we're mixing all of it. We're in the studio, we're talking. Everyone's a fanatic in the studio. I think they love design, not just car design, motorcycles. And, you know, the Ducatis used to be what everyone talked about. And then it moves to some other trend. And now these kind of cafe racers they're actually still cool. They were cool 20 years ago.
And coming back again, actually.
And so we were watching all of that, all of it. And then society, you know, the conflicts or not conflicts, the euphoria moments. Or
a pandemic.
That changed us. That also is good and bad. The way we're working now is a result of the pandemic, and some of it horrible. Deeply horrible, but also some of the things we thought you needed to do, like travel, like you need to see the clay, especially big companies with studios everywhere. I was on a plane every 2 weeks, and I've flown 3 times in 2.5 years. And VR, it accelerated things. So, you know, we've always, as a Japanese company, we've always had digital, and we had VR a long time. We didn't use it. And now we have live VR and avatars, and we can have live meetings, and I hear every voice now, where in the past, you go, the boss is there, this director of the studio is next to me, we're talking, problem solving, quick. The voices would be unheard, actually. Yes, there's 20 people looking at the clay model, but you heard 3 voices, maybe. Now, because these mics are so... And you see the avatars moving around the car, where everyone used to be behind you. You see someone pop, bing, to there, and you see the name and everything.
Well, you have your own avatar now, too.
I have an avatar, which is embarrassing. Thank you very much.
It's on Instagram,
bring it up. But these things we wouldn't have accelerated to. Our DDMs are spectacular. I have an image also where it looks like the Last Supper. 12 executives, all of them goggled up. These are not designers. One of them is an engineer who, of course, is also sympathetic to the technology. Other than me and the engineer, everyone else, this is alien. And it's impressive how quickly. And it saved millions of the model making. We used to believe that an executive cannot choose if we didn't make the highest level plastic model. So and there was 3 exteriors, each one $350,000 or whatever. So at each milestone, you were looking at millions, 2 million because of interior, in models.
Wow.
Gone.
Wow. Not to mention the years that have not been shaved off your life because of time zone travel.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
All these
Given
things.
your 3 flights in 2.5 years.
Now we're going to travel again. I think
Yeah.
that the human side is also what we underestimated, because everything was working well and we were seeing zooming and all of this. So in one way you had the perception that you're connecting more, but on the other side people are feeling a bit isolated, and so I do think we're going to have to find a happy medium.
Well, you can't have those wonderful conversations that are impromptu and that spur a thought or an idea, simply because you're in the same room together and it's not forced and orchestrated the way that a Zoom call might be.
And the things that are not on the camera.
Right.
So a studio is more than one project. And when you walk through the California or the London or our Shanghai studio, sometimes it's a sketch that was not selected for many reasons, but it's inspiring something else, or there's a little model, or there's a conversation.
Yeah.
We need to reverse that after COVID.
As we go into autonomous vehicles, what's going to separate one vehicle from another? Will it remain exterior design? Will it be more emphasis on interior design?
Practically, or the tangible things, of course, our interiors are just being transformed by autonomous driving. It's a combination of the connectivity that was also, it's probably not specifically linked. So EV, electrification, autonomous, and connectivity, they don't need each other, but they have been helped by each other. So the screens and what you can do, the access to apps, all these things were coming, but if you didn't have autonomous driving, how are you going to deal with 2,000 apps? Probably you shouldn't anyway, even under autonomous conditions. But the architecture, what you're asking seats to do in the future, what are you asking steering wheels to do in the future, it's having monstrous architectural changes. The drive-by-wire, which if you ask anyone, everyone hates, it's going to be a requirement in the very near future, because what do you do with the steering wheel on the highest level autonomous driving? It becomes a bit of an obstacle. And there's going to be things that are going to, again, change our world. But attraction and human nature is not changing that quickly. We still love what we love, and people are attracted by objects. And so the job of us as exterior designers is just more holistic now. You still are in love with shape, and it's what attracts people. It's human nature. But yes, it's true, the interior is really transformative, and we're not probably doing enough. One of the biggest interests is, and I always ask Matt Weaver is the vice president of our European studio, is like, well, the European cars, the silhouettes are almost identical. And even, it doesn't matter if it's an EV or rear-wheel drive.
Right.
Humans are not rational completely. Even the rationality is a kind of European DNA thing. There is right. And in the US, it's less. They're a little bit more open to different things, and the Japanese as well. So we're finding all the time like this interesting thing. Now that we have these skateboard platforms, you can really put windshields anywhere. It's not being challenged that much. Probably lucid a bit. It's it's changed a bit the visual. But I think the next generation, hopefully people are a little bit more creative about the definition of a car, especially silhouettes. That's my own hope. But.
Newsweek magazine had an inaugural list of world's greatest auto disruptors. You were on that list. You flew to New York. You collected the award. You saw your daughter as well. What does it mean to you in their Designer of the Year awards to name you as one of the greatest auto disruptors?
I was relieved that it wasn't punitive because I misunderstood. I thought, of course, I thought it was when I got the phone call, I thought it was a joke or something like that.
You thought you'd done something wrong.
I don't see myself like that at all. I mean, it's a bit like you're being recognized for the job description. You're in a company that's so big, the unusual or irresponsible idea is our job, because companies very easily get comfortable with the right decision, and that we need, humans are not looking always for the right decision. So I feel it's our job to say, hey, what if? The what ifs in the company, we have to show them. We also do the rational ones so they see some of that. So, I mean, I was very humbled by that, especially in the people. There's some spectacular lead designers there that I didn't know how they made their decision, but especially where it's a community of people who are always pushing and wanting better for the world through the automobile. So it was tremendously humbling.
One final humbling thought: driving the Z through the streets of Coconut Grove, Miami. I mean, there couldn't be a more defining period for you, I'm guessing, or defining moment.
No. There's not. I mean, it's quite emotional. I haven't driven it yet today. When I get in the car, it's just, there are not that many Zs, so to be able to have worked on a couple, but this one is much more, of course, I was head of design, and the discussions that led up to that car finally making it. And when I'm going to park it in the place where that E-Type was. And if the new residents will allow it, and then I'm going to take a photo.
Yeah, great.
And then I'll go to prison.
Thank you for being on the program.
Thanks so much.
What a pleasure, Alfonso.
Thank you.
The automobile is one of the most important inventions that revolutionized the modern world. In America, the rich history of car culture runs deep as technology continues to shape the future of the industry. Jason Stein,
former publisher of Automotive News,
is here to share the stories of people passionate about cars, from industry leaders and innovators to car-obsessed celebrities. Buckle up as Jason takes you inside the boardroom, onto the track, and around the bend on Cars and Culture on SiriusXM Business Radio.